Moving into part 2 of the Chapter 24 presentation, we're going to look at some of the effects of the Protestant Reformation and the extreme violence and also the state building that results. The religious competition that was at the heart of the Reformation also played a role in the political centralization and increasingly powerful European states. And these religious wars could not have happened without the centralization of many of these areas. The 30 Years' War was was fought in Germany. It was incredibly bloody, and in some areas of Germany, 70% of the population died, making the wars of religion the bloodiest, the most costly wars in Europe by percentage of population. Not in sheer numbers of dead, but in the percentage of people who died. This war was mainly between princes of Germany who became Lutheran and the rest of Europe who was still Catholic. This war ended with the Peace of Westphalia, and the Peace of Westphalia is extremely important because it introduces the notion that different states are sovereign and equal, with the right to run their own domestic affairs. So basically, stay out of their business. The French Wars of Religion lasted for nearly half a century, from 1562 to 98, and they were mainly between Huguenots and Catholics. And we'll look at one of their incidences in a little bit. And we also see wars between Spain and England. Remember when Henry divorced his first wife, who was Catholic? Well, she was also Spanish, the most Catholic country, arguably, in Europe at the time. And when Henry's daughter Elizabeth continued the practice of Protestantism in England, the Spanish sent an armada, or a fleet of ships, to take her down. Unfortunately, those ships were not so successful and they were destroyed in a big storm, and they never even got to the coast. So the Spanish Armada was indeed a failure. For people, effects could be felt as well, not just for governments. One of the main effects, obviously, was all the death from the wars, but also witch hunts. This growing tension between Catholics and Protestants manifested itself in these hunts, which were strongest in areas where religious confrontation was the greatest, or you had the most struggle between Protestants and Catholics. Over 60,000 suspected witches, mainly women, lost their lives. These women were mainly outcasts in society, as you probably saw with the Salem witch trials. One example of a state consolidating itself and basing itself around religion is Spain, and we can see this with the Spanish Inquisition. This was founded by Ferdinand and Isabella in 1478 to rid Spain of secret practitioners of Judaism or Islam and also Protestantism. This Inquisition was spread to holdings outside of the Iberian Peninsula, like the Netherlands, which is going to have a big impact, and we'll talk about that in just a moment, and also into the Western Hemisphere or the Americas. It included imprisonment, executions, world famous intimidation, and it got rid of a lot of nobles who might have been Protestant. It also got rid of a lot of people who were the learned in Spain. And this is the Inquisitor's wheel here. This was one of the forms of torture that was used to get confessions, or false confessions even, from people suspected of not being Catholic. This is Europe after the Peace of Westphalia, and one interesting thing to note that's going to come into play in just a second is that you can see the Spanish control not only Spain, but also parts of Germany and parts of the Netherlands, what becomes the Netherlands. It's not shown on this map because the Netherlands had already partially gained independence. They also control part of Italy. Above that is the Papal States, or those controlled by the Pope. And then you've got your Austrian Habsburg possessions as well. So the end result of this is that the Holy Roman Empire, what becomes Germany, is intact and sovereign. Remember when I said we were going to talk a little bit about one of the incidents of the French Wars of Religion? Well, that is the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. The St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre occurred in 1572, and it was sparked, some people think, by Catherine de' Medici. Her husband, Charles IX, was marrying off his Catholic daughter to a Protestant named Henry of Navarre. And in order to do this, they had to have a huge wedding. Located à Paris. And this wedding contained many, many of the nobility. Now, at the wedding, on one side you had the Protestants, the Huguenots, and on the other side you had the Catholics. 4 days after the marriage of the princess, the Catholics attacked, well, some people would say the Protestants attacked. Either way, the Protestants and Catholics started fighting each other, and this was during one of the parties for the marriage ceremony, and 5,000, or some say maybe 3,000 people were killed. Now, while there were many other Catholics, there weren't as many Huguenots, because remember, a large concentration of them were in the nobility, so this really crippled the Huguenots. The French Wars of Religion ended with a peace, the Edict of Nantes, that said that you could be Catholic or you could be Protestant. There was supposed to be a sort of religious toleration. It was said during this time period that the rivers ran red with blood of these nobles because so many were killed. And as you can see from this scene, it is pretty violent. Here we have Queen Elizabeth, the famous Virgin Queen, wearing her pearls, a symbol of her virginity. She's also got her hands here on what's possibly the Americas, the colonies, basically. And here we have the English ships, and over here the Spanish ships being destroyed. Now, some states did solidify, but others did not really do as good of a job. One state that didn't really solidify was the Holy Roman Empire, and we'll talk about that in just a moment here. But first we need to talk about some of these that did solidify. Henry VIII in England, Louis the 11th in France, and Fernando and Isabel of Castile and Aragon in Spain. These states use different innovations in order to maintain centralization, such as taxes, new taxes, more rigorous standing armies, more bureaucracy and government workers, and law codes. We talked about the taxes before, the taxes for, chimney taxes and window taxes and stuff like that. Despite the best efforts of Charles V, the Holy Roman Empire never overcame its internal fragmentation and didn't really become as solidified and consolidated as some of these others. Not surprisingly, these states often tested each other militarily. Sometimes, as with the 30 Years' War, the results were really devastating. And other times their wars did not last nearly as long or did not nearly have such a large loss of life. The Seven Years' War was also a huge struggle for power right around our period break. And in many ways, this is the first global war. And it's likely that these confrontations actually resulted in competition in Europe that led to it being more, I guess I want to say more competitive. So this really compared with China's governing in that China didn't really have anybody to compete with. So this type of competition, especially military competition, led to increases in technology because of the competition. Okay, that's where we're going to end this part of the PowerPoint. Next, we'll talk about the routes to consolidation.